Hi, my name's Layla. I think there's actually been some confusion. I'm currently a student at Yale University. I'm in my third year. But we've had similar movements that were inspired by Columbia's encampment. And I was one of the individuals out of 48 people who was arrested on April 22nd when they tried to forcibly remove us from the encampment after a week long of being in Beinecke Plaza, which in the past has actually been used to build encampments to protest against South African apartheid. In 1986, they built shanty towns and they arrested around 70 students as well, with subsequent suspensions and punishments that were enacted by the university against these individuals. And I guess we're also kind of repeating that piece of history, and we wanted to simultaneously honor that by doing it on Beinecke Plaza. But they had arrested us in a systematic way, actually, where they targeted the Muslim and POC students first, and then they took us and kind of treated us differently to the non-POC individuals. They even provided additional warnings to non-POC students before getting arrested. And then they had taken us and processed us with a Class A misdemeanor and felony trespassing, which is the highest class that can be given to an individual in the state of Connecticut. My court date is actually tomorrow, so we've been dealing with things going back and forth with that. But afterwards, we waited a week and then we decided to rebuild the encampment again. And when we did that, it was up on a different portion of campus, and that stayed up for around a couple of days before we also had to forcibly take it down because the administration was threatening with suspension of the students. And they were making up several excuses to kind of validate the reason as to why they wanted to take it down, like, exaggerated excuses like grass death or you're blocking the entryway of other individuals, even though we had marshals allowing for people to pass by easily and move around and navigating them throughout the entire encampment without a problem. But Yale was just looking for any opportunity to shut down these encampments. And then shortly afterward, they arrested 4 additional students in a very brutal manner. They actually ended up breaking one student's hand. They broke another student's nose. They sat on another student, leaving him unable to breathe for around a couple of minutes. And it was completely unprompted, unwarranted. There were very minimal warnings given before they just started arresting and brutalizing the students who were protesting this past week. And that was something that was incredibly horrifying to witness. And not only that, but it prompted us to really reconsider Yale's relationship with Israel and the broader New Haven community as well, because the increased militarization and heavy presence of police is something that's been character of all of these encampments across the nation. But one thing in particular is that Yale University has actually collaborated with the IDF to train the Yale Police Department in the past. And the chief of the Yale Police Department, Anthony Campbell, if you look him up on Google, he's actually praising the tactics that the IDF had taught them in the past to continue to hold this cycle of brutalizing student protesters and activists. And again, everything is just so deeply interconnected. And we've seen this with Israel and the IDF training police officers that contribute to the brutalization of Black Americans in the United States, or the brutalization of POC and minority students through police brutality. And again, it's all interrelated and interconnected. But beyond that, our demands for Yale University were incredibly clear. We wanted them to disclose and divest from Israel weapon manufacturing, and also reckon with their involvement in human rights abuses that has been persistent throughout the course of history, and acknowledge that they are continuously on the wrong side in history and continue to invest in human rights abuses worldwide. And we know we've been trying to do that. And the thing is, transparency and accountability are key for negotiations, and our universities fail to comply with that. This isn't only a tactic that's been used for us, but a tactic that's been used for other universities, and I'm sure a lot of the student activists can agree with this. And they continuously try to turn other students against protesters. Particularly now they're employing this tactic where they're closing off graduation or canceling commencement for students. And this isn't out of safety or trying to protect the students from student protesters, because again, we're inherently peaceful, but it's an attempt to turn the rest of university members against pro-Palestinian students to make it easier to silence us and quell our movements. And again, like this is just I will not continue to let my university dictate the political future of Palestine. It's my constitutional right to protest as a student, and I will continue to do so within my means. And as long as I'm a student at Yale University or I'm standing and that these injustices continue to persist, I will continue fighting against those. And additionally, we've had, claims, and Yale University is so quick to denounce anti-Semitism, but when students have said in the past, death to Palestine, death to terrorists, death to Muslims on this university campus, Yale University failed to release proper statements with that. And this goes into play because our protests are an attempt to address and eradicate this white supremacist ideology that continues to prop up the ethno-nationalist state that is Israel. It's an apartheid state, and the universities have to acknowledge that because it's been labeled such from Human Rights Watch and other human rights organizations like Amnesty International. And when we continue to reduce it to a religious issue by making exaggerated claims of, like anti-Semitism, it actually is harmful because Israel is not attempting to eradicate a specific religion, but it's trying to eradicate the Palestinian ethnicity, which includes Muslims, Christians, and Jewish individuals. There's intra-Jewish issues with Mizrahi and Sephardic Jews in Israel as well, and they're also treated as subpar citizens in comparison to, white Israelis too. So this is why I always say that I will continue to denounce anti-Semitism, but it is not equal to us protesting against anti-Zionism. Because again, we have Jewish students who are continuing to denounce Israel. We have the support of dozens of individuals who are even marshaling from Jewish Voices for Peace and Jews for Ceasefire now. And then if we also want to get into it, there is the rise of Islamophobia and xenophobia and arrests in the United States. Again, majority of these students and a lot of these students who are being arrested first, like myself included, were Muslim or visibly Muslim or POC. These, POC students are continuing to be at the front lines of these movements and sacrifice these things when it's typically very hard for them to they're always, I guess, pushed aside and considered as radical protesters or aggressive or the aggressors in these situations. So we're continuing to put ourselves on the front line for these things, but the media is instead trying to focus on additional narrative that we're continuously being spoon-fed instead of actually acknowledging this rise in Islamophobia and how Muslim and POC and Black and Brown students are continuing to put themselves on these front lines and fighting against, this humanitarian issue, which is again the crux of this issue. It's not a religious issue. It's not a binary thing. It's us trying to fight against a huge humanitarian cause in the apartheid state that is Israel. We're trying to redirect the attention back onto Gaza and to make people aware that 30,000 people, and in addition, 30,000 counted people, which doesn't also take into consideration the people who are currently buried under the rubble, but taking into consideration that this is a grave humanitarian issue with severe consequences that'll have long-lasting effects in this region for probably longer than our generation will live to see. And this is exactly what we're trying to make our policy workers and our students and our institutions focus on. And it's crazy to me because these institutions are meant to encourage freedom of speech and creative thought and creative dialogue. And they have classes on anti-colonialism and anti-imperialism, and they have some of the best educators that come from around the world to talk about these experiences. Yeah, but it's become increasingly corporal. And these universities, instead of curating this thought and curating the next generation of advocates to make the world a better place, they're instead pumping out, again, future war criminals or individuals who won't place priorities on improving the situations of human rights abuses, not only in Palestine, but worldwide, because again, their focus is only corporal. And it's just incredibly disheartening to see because that's something I wanted to receive an education through a liberal institution or liberal arts university without, being victim, I guess, to this corporal environment and increased capitalization of our universities and education systems. I mean, like, we have seen this repeated in history. Nelson Mandela pointed out to UC Berkeley protesters that were protesting against South African apartheid, we've seen this again, and history continues to repeat itself. But our generation is continuing to do the same thing now. There have been 58 plus encampments nationwide. Whether or not they have been closed, the tide is turning and will continue to be the generation of change. And honestly, I'm very grateful to have been given the privilege to get arrested and volunteer myself to get arrested when I see that Palestinians in the West Bank don't even have due process, or that they're being thrown in prisons without reasoning behind them, being separated from their families, getting arrested on charges that are miscellaneous or non-existent, to say the least. But we have the privilege as university students to voluntarily get ourselves arrested, and at least protest for this. And honestly, it's the least that we can do. And summer break is just around the corner. I know our universities are expecting our activism to stifle and kind of die down with time, but I don't think that that's going to be the case, because this is an ongoing crisis. The war has been going on for 6 months, and 6 months, and so long as it continues to go on, and so long as, or until the apartheid state of Israel is dismantled, I'm confident that these university students, including myself, will continue to stand up against injustices. Because, you know, true freedom is collective freedom, and none of us will be free until Palestine is free. And the intersectionality between Palestine and Sudan and Haiti and Congo, we're also simultaneously advocating for this. And I will continue to apply pressure on these universities and on our institutions and our faculty and staff members, because despite peaceful attempts at negotiation, that clearly doesn't get the message across. So the only other attempt is to continue to apply pressure on these universities with our encampments, with the protests, with meeting with faculty, and not allow this heavy militarization of these campuses. We don't want to live again in a post 9/11 reality where the university is coordinating with the FBI out of safety for their students, but in reality, we know exactly what this means, and that means continuing to observe and monitor their